welcome to yet another episode of London Eye. Today on the show, let's discuss BRICS and where India fits in to that BRICS universe. Because this year there's been a lot of disappointment and disenchantment about how the BRIC economies and the BRIC markets are doing. BRIC funds have lost a lot of their assets under management. Who better to talk about the BRICS story and whether it's losing its sheen than the man who coined the term? Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs is my guest on the show today. Jim, thank you very much for joining in first. This year has not been the best of years for the BRICS, so let me start by asking you about that. Why is this disenchantment which has started creeping in about the BRICS markets?
Well, first of all, I think you do have to distinguish between the BRICS markets and the BRIC economies. Markets and economies don't always go exactly hand in hand. Secondly, despite that, of course, the last decade was fantastic for both the BRIC economies and the BRIC markets, with the performance of economic growth and the markets vastly surpassing even what I thought. So they've sort of set themselves a very high hurdle. So in some ways, some kind of slowdown and relative disappointment performance-wise compared to the past decade was sort of always going to happen. Against that background, I think you have to dive within it. Economically, China, even though it has slowed, it's doing better than I had assumed for this decade, whereas the other three are all doing differing degrees of somewhat underperformance. And that is different than the markets, because of course China as an equity market has disappointed the others, even though economically I would argue it's doing better. And then I think beyond that, you have to really look at each individual country to see quite what's really going on, particularly on the economy, but to some extent on the markets too.
But do you think global investors are losing interest in the BRICS as a theme, perhaps because of China's slowdown and how poorly Brazil and Russia have done as well?
Oh, definitely. Goldman Sachs Asset Management, where I've just recently retired, has both a BRIC and a Next 11 equity fund. And in the past 12 months, we've seen a lot more flows into the N11 fund than we have to the BRIC fund. And I think it's representative of broader behaviour by investors. And to be honest with you, I think it shows, not for the first time in my life, that many investors, even cautious passive ones, are very momentum driven. So the fact that the story has lost some of its acceleration, and as you touched on in some cases, particularly I think in Brazil and India, has had some disappointments, people have lost interest.
How would you rank them now if you had to choose your pecking order in the BRICS? What would it be?
Well, let me just say one other thing before I do that, because even though they've lost the fascination of the markets, economically, what's going on with the BRIC countries is still the biggest thing of this generation. I'm fond of saying to people that China creates another Greece every 12 and a half weeks, another Cyprus every week, another Spain every year. Actually, in the past 2 years, China's created another India. So China on its own is quite remarkable. And 2011, we don't really have full data to compare yet, but for 2011, the BRIC countries created between them another Italy in 1 year. And by 2015, the four of them collectively will be bigger than the US. So we need to keep all of this in perspective.
Your pecking order?
My pecking order. I think economically I'd have China number one, because I think it's adjusting very well. It would be a close toss-up between India and Brazil as number two, and then Russia last, number four. Not the same in markets. In terms of markets, I would have Russia number one, because it's very cheap. China number two, Brazil number three, and India number four. Although all four of them, the way I look at things, are actually now quite cheap. And actually, contrary to what we've just said, I think for the true forward-looking investor, over the next 5 years, this is a fantastic time to be investing in the BRIC markets.
So you think the story is not broken, it's just a temporary respite that the BRICS might be going through?
I don't think the story is broken at all. I think what's happened is, because the BRIC story became so strong during the last decade, that by the time we hit the global credit crisis in 2008, people were absolutely in love with the BRIC countries, and you could see that with China and India in particular, that were trading at a premium on a forward price-earnings ratio to all the developed markets. At one point, both of them were nearly double the US. And people couldn't get enough of the BRIC story. People are opening BRIC funds all over the world. And it tends to be the case. Once you get to that kind of degree of herd mentality, some of the enthusiasm has gone. And subsequently what we've seen in the past few years. Now, because there is some cyclical economic disappointment, people are really giving up hope. But I've been looking at markets for 30-odd years, and one has to always remember valuations, and the valuations of these markets today are the most attractive they've been for many, many years. So not at all, and I think over the next few years investing in the BRIC countries is again a very attractive thing to do.
Not just the BRICS, but emerging markets in general. Since the start of this year, people have been talking about how developed markets will have already started outperforming again, and that will continue to be a trend, which is very different from what we've been hearing for the last couple of years. Do you think that can work out?
Well, I don't think it's actually true. Because China and Brazil are very big components of emerging market indices, their weakness is dominating what's happening to the aggregate. You take those out of it and you look at a lot of other important emerging markets, that they are actually outperforming everywhere except Japan. Goldman Sachs Asset Management has a so-called Next 11 fund, which consists of equity markets in the 10 largest populated countries after the BRIC countries, including places like Indonesia, Turkey, Philippines, and many of these markets are up nearly 20% this year. So people say that emerging markets are underperforming developed markets, but it's not true, and I think it's very dangerous to generalize about these things. Very dangerous.
Since you mentioned Japan, how significant are the ramifications of what's going on in Japan over the last few months for global equity performance?
I think this is a huge, huge story. I've often described Japan as existing in a happy depression for the past 20 years, in that the level of GDP per capita has continued to creep up, although the economy and their markets has been very weak. What we've seen with Abe and Abenomics is that they want to have enough of this. And the aggressive monetary policy stance they're undertaking in particular is really important for driving asset flows and a weaker yen and a lot of money back into the Japanese stock market. But very importantly for many other markets around the world, the infamous Mrs. Watanabe, the Japanese retail investor, wants to buy a lot of high-yielding foreign markets. So their appetite for high-yielding foreign bonds in particular is rising sharply.
So would you say that the implications are largely for liquidity, or is it something else? Because some people, including you, seem to believe that the recent collapse in gold has a little to do with what's going on in Japan.
Well, I think it's certainly important liquidity for bond markets, but I think it might be something a little bit more, because we forget Japan is still the third largest economy in the world, despite what's happened the past 20 years. And so if Japanese policymakers are doing something to really rescue the domestic economy, I find myself, and I was just there recently, I find myself thinking, is this a case for Japanese investors finally starting to invest in real things in Japan? And linking it to gold, if you trace back over the past 11, 12 years, some of the earliest buyers of gold were Japanese investors. And so I suspect suddenly Japanese investors don't have any need for gold when they can buy domestic real estate, domestic equities, things that haven't been rewarding for them for 20 years. So I suspect, perhaps unconventionally, the gold weakness might have something to do with the Japan story, yeah.
Do you see it persisting? Do you see lower levels in gold?
I'm in the camp that gold's probably peaked. I think the past month has demonstrated that gold, even if it ever was a safe haven, clearly isn't, because it's fell 15% in 2 days. And that this notion that it's an easy alternative to invest in against easy money everywhere has been disproven. And I think gold's problem is there's far too many people that have been speculating on it that have no natural reason to be owning gold. So I could easily see another $200, $300, maybe even $400 decline in the price of gold before it settles. I've not seen for many years why it's been truly justified above $1,000 an ounce, and I wouldn't be surprised if we go down quite a bit more.
Would you say the same about crude?
For separate reasons, I've been negative about crude for the past 2 years. I think there's enormous things going on in the supply and demand dynamics of energy, particularly things related to oil. On the supply side, the whole shale gas and shale oil story in the United States is a huge story. And I think in China, because they're focusing on what I'd call quality of growth as opposed to quantity, it means the demand for energy-polluting fuels and conventional fuels is just not going to be as strong from China this decade as it was the last. And I think that combination of changing supply and demand dynamics, it's not good for the price of crude. So I could see crude going down a bit further, maybe to $80 a barrel or something from where we are today.
Are you surprised by how resilient it has been, though? Because some of these dynamics that you spoke about have been in place for a while, but crude's been just sticking around that $100 mark.
I wouldn't say I'm surprised. I think against what I said, of course, we have this never-ending uncertainty in the Middle East and huge fears about escalation of many conflicts in the Middle East, and people worrying about the safety of supplies. So I think there is a good $10 a barrel premium built in for Middle Eastern uncertainty, which just in the past few days is showing signs of escalating again. So I'm not overly surprised. I am a little bit surprised that many people still talk about the medium to long-term outlook being bullish, because I think those days are past. I think the whole bull cycle in not all but many commodities has probably peaked.
At this point, a quick break. We are back with London Eye in just a minute with Jim O'Neill. Welcome back. You're watching London Eye. My guest on the show today is Jim O'Neill, talking about whether the BRICS story is just going through a temporary lull and will bounce back, and why India is at the bottom of the list, according to him, in the BRICS story. A lot of people in India have taken quite a bit of heart from the fact that crude started collapsing, gold collapsed 15% in 2 days, because these things are good for us, but India still remains bottom of the barrel for you in terms of the BRICS ranking. Why are you not optimistic on the margin that falling commodities might help India's macro out?
I do think falling commodity prices is a really good thing for India, so in that sense it's very important that you remind me of that. The reason why I say that in terms of ranking of markets, because India's on a forward PE actually the most expensive, and the other three look really cheap. Even though India's struggled itself, it hasn't really done poorly like the other three markets. And then as it relates to the economics, we have an India that's growing in a 5 to 6% vicinity against the background of an India that if it really got its act together, could quite easily grow by 10% given its demographics. So some of my caution about India relates to the fact that the policymakers seem to be in almost constant gridlock in trying to unleash supply-side reforms and productivity changes which will allow the Indian economy to grow that its long-term potential, to me, suggests it could do.
Mm. Do you sense any major disappointment when you speak to your investors about India? Do they say that, we thought so much about this place, but they seem to be missing the boat?
Well, I'd say from a lot of Western investors, it's almost a bit more cynical to say, told you so, that, many people, particularly I always find it quite amusing, people that have visited India for the first time, and particularly Mumbai, are always shocked about what Mumbai is like as a place visually. And so it immediately scares them off from investing and the whole experience of using Indian infrastructure. And so quite a lot of investors often get dragged into investing into India by default, really, and the fact it did so well dragged money in. So the fact that the Indian market has stalled and the Indian economy is slower is actually got a bit of a resigned sort of I told you so view amongst many investors I speak to. And I link to what I said earlier. A lot of people look at what goes on and say, India needs a lot more decisive government and to try and be more ambitious in terms of introducing economic reforms, then it'll do better. And I have to say on that, I agree with them.
What's your view on equities globally this year? Because there seems to be a bit of disbelief that markets have done so well. These corrections are proving to be more and more elusive. Do you think the bears or the naysayers will continue to be frustrated this year?
Well, I've been essentially bullish ever since 2009, and I never believed the decline we saw on the back of the Great Recession in '08 would last that long, because equities are really cheap. I spent a lot of time looking at something I call the global equity risk premium, which is the so-called risk-free rates over government bonds, and it's really high. And when it's really high, it's a good time to invest. And if you look today as to why it's high, it's not only because bond yields are low, it's also because dividend yields are very high, and partly due to the indirect consequences of China. Global growth continues to be okay, even despite some of the challenges in the West. Then if you add on top of all of that the extraordinary generosity of Western central bank monetary policy, it doesn't surprise me at all that equities are doing well, and I think it will, broadly speaking, continue.
What's the biggest risk this year, you think?
I think the biggest risk this year, ironically, would probably be if the US economy starts to recover sharply from here, particularly as many people now think it's slowing, so much so that the Federal Reserve Board starts to scale back on some of its asset purchases, and people start focusing on so-called exit strategies. I think that would be an end of some of the liquidity benefit to markets, and that probably would be the biggest risk. I think a lot of the other things that people talk about, the European crisis, fears of a China hard landing, Middle East, these are things that people have all sort of learnt to live with to some extent. So probably the biggest risk would be an early exit from monetary policy by the Fed.
But from the data that you've been receiving or reading so far, would you say that's a high probability outcome, or that phase is still a bit away?
I'd say that phase, this is why the markets are doing so well, that phase looks quite a way off. Even though we've had some softening of growth in the States, it's not been much, but the most important story is that inflation has been so low that the Federal Reserve Board is making it very clear that they plan to stick with this policy and do not dismiss the possibility of even more easing as we go forward. And so I think that the notion of them exiting right now seems quite a way off, but I'd put that as the biggest risk for the year, though.
What would you buy, though, if you were bullish on equities right now? Is it just prudent to be in US and Japan, which are the outperforming markets, or is there better value elsewhere?
I think there is much better value elsewhere. The US rally's been so big, there's not actually a lot of value there. The US, you've got momentum and support of policy, but no value. The big value play is Europe. And the BRICS. And I think for people that really want to buy and hold stocks for a bit longer and really focus on the underlying value and longer term, my guess is the better places to invest now are Europe and the BRICS, although they might not give as steady a performance in the near term as the US and Japan. But that's where the real opportunities are. It's very interesting in that regard, by the way, that the past 2 weeks the European markets have started to rally sharply on the belief that we're shifting away from some of this austerity, and of course the ECB reduced interest rates last week. So I think there's a lot of positive forces out there for many markets, but the ones I think on a 12-month to longer basis that will perform the best will be Europe and the BRICS.
Why are commodities doing so poorly, though? I mean, if the global growth outlook is not too bad, then why are things like copper, crude beginning to collapse? Is there a note of dissonance out there?
Well, I think there's two things. I think you have to look at some commodities for different reasons, as we discussed earlier. I think if you look at crude, there's a lot of big supply side changes going on, especially with shale oil and shale gas. I think with copper, some of that is a little bit surprising, but I'm guessing it relates to many people starting to acknowledge that China is not going to grow anywhere near 10% anymore, and probably between 7 and 8, and perhaps people have built up too high expectations of China growing close to 10% for too long. So that would be my hunch as to why copper is so soft.
So do you see this as a grind up kind of a global equity phase, or are you predicting in the next couple of years return to a roaring bull market?
I think it's going to be a time till we get a return to a roaring bull market. the scars of 2008 are still very deep, and ironically, despite the rally, people don't like equities. So people buy equities by default, and if you look within the markets, particularly within the US market, defensives have been leading the rally, and that's a sign that people don't really trust the equity market, and they're doing it partly because there's no return elsewhere. But I think gradually, as equity markets keep on performing, people will start to rediscover that it is an asset class that has some underlying attributes and, of course, value.
Jim, a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.